My son gave me a security camera system for Christmas. Said it was for safety. Said he worried about me living alone in a house that big. 3 days later, my neighbor, a retired FBI agent, took one look at the setup and told me to unplug everything immediately. I didn't believe him. It was my son. But a week after that, when I found what was hidden inside my own filing cabinet, I understood that Christmas gift was never about keeping me safe. My name is not important. What happened to me is, I turned 67 last October, and the season changed the way seasons do in Tennessee, slow and golden, the maples burning red along the ridgeline behind my property, the mornings coming in cool and quiet. I'd been retired for 2 years from 31 years with the county assessor's office. I knew every parcel of land in 3 counties by heart. I knew property values the way some men know scripture, and I was living alone in the house my wife and I had built together, in a neighborhood where I knew every neighbor's name and their dog's name, and which families had been there since before the interstate came through. My wife, Margaret, had passed 4 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that disease tends to be. One November she was planting tulip bulbs in the side garden. By February she was gone. After that, the house got very quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I'd always been a man who liked his own company. Turns out there's a difference between choosing quiet and having it handed to you. My son Brandon lived 40 minutes away in Nashville with his wife Courtney and their 2 kids. We talked on Sundays mostly, saw each other on holidays, the occasional birthday. It wasn't a cold relationship. It just wasn't a warm one either. After Margaret passed, something shifted between us that neither of us knew how to name. She'd been the one who kept us connected, the calls, the dinners, the small occasions she'd manufactured just to bring us all to the same table. Without her, we defaulted to politeness. 2 men who loved each other and no longer quite knew how to say it. So when Brandon showed up 2 days before Christmas with a truck bed full of equipment, I was surprised. He'd never been the type for gestures. "Dad," he said, hauling a box through my front door. "I've been worried about you out here. You're alone. The nearest neighbor's a 1/4 mile away. I want to set up a security system. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Peace of mind for both of us." I watched him carry in 4 more boxes. Courtney stayed in the truck with the kids. Brandon had always been better at doing than visiting. "I don't need all this," I told him. "Dad." He gave me that look, the one that said he'd already made up his mind. "Just let me do this. Please." So I let him. He spent most of that day installing things. A camera above the front door, 1 at the back, 2 mounted on the garage corners, a hub device that sat on my kitchen counter and connected everything to an app on his phone. He walked me through the setup, showed me how to pull up the footage on my own phone too. Smart cameras, he called them. Motion activated. Cloud storage. Night vision. You can see everything from anywhere, he said, showing me the app. And so can I, so I'll know you're okay. I stood in my kitchen looking at the little device on the counter. It had a small lens in the front, almost invisible. It looked like an air freshener. "And this one?" I asked. "Indoor unit. Covers the living room and kitchen. Main living areas." He smiled. "So I know you're not just sitting in the dark eating cereal for dinner." I laughed. It felt good to laugh with him. That night, I sat in my recliner and watched the evening news, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone in the house. My son had spent a whole day here. He'd carried heavy boxes. He'd climbed a ladder in the cold. He'd done something fathers dream their sons will still do. He'd showed up. I didn't know the camera on my kitchen counter was uploading everything to a private server that had nothing to do with my phone. Frank DeLuca had spent 22 years with the FBI out of the Memphis field office, mostly financial crimes and fraud. He retired to the house at the end of my road 6 years ago. We'd become the kind of friends that men in their 60s tend to become comfortable, undemanding, built around Saturday mornings and strong coffee and not having to explain yourself. He could walk into my kitchen without knocking. I could call him at 10 at night. That was the friendship. He came over New Year's morning, the way he always did. I'd made biscuits. He brought a jar of his wife's sorghum. We were sitting at the kitchen table when he noticed the hub device on the counter. "Brandon set up a security system," I said. "Christmas present." Frank set down his coffee. He was quiet for a moment in the way that people who've spent decades listening to people lie get quiet, not absent, but very present. "Can I look at it?" I shrugged. "Be my guest." He walked to the counter and picked up the device, turned it over, examined the back panel. Then he did something I didn't expect. He pulled out his reading glasses, held the device up to the light from the window, and looked at the lens for a long time. "Where'd Brandon buy this?" he asked. I didn't ask. "Why?" He set the device back down. His expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had. "This isn't a commercial unit," he said. "I've seen setups like this before. Consumer security cameras have a certain form factor, standardized components. This has been modified." I waited. "The lens assembly is different. And there's a secondary transmitter here." He pointed to a spot on the back I would have called a vent. "Standard units don't have this. This is transmitting to something other than your home network." I told him he was wrong. Not rudely, I just said it the way you say things when you're certain. "It's Brandon, my son. He was trying to do something nice." Frank looked at me for a moment. "When's the last time Brandon did something out of the blue for you?" I didn't answer. "I'm not saying anything about your son," he said carefully. "I'm saying someone modified this equipment. That's not an opinion. That's what I'm looking at." I drove to the Franklin police station that afternoon, telling myself I was going to prove Frank wrong. The desk officer sent me to a detective named Paulson, a quiet man in his late 40s, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the particular stillness of someone who didn't waste energy on things that didn't matter. I explained the situation. He listened without expression, which is the professional courtesy of people who've heard everything. "We have a digital forensics unit," he said. "Give me an hour." He came back in 40 minutes. With him was a younger man who set a laptop on the desk and didn't make eye contact with me right away. "Mr. Garvey," Detective Paulson said, "the indoor unit your son installed, it's been modified. It's transmitting audio and video to an external server, not your home network, not any commercial cloud service we can identify off the shelf." The room didn't tilt. It just went very still. "Meaning someone can see my house," I said. "Everything in range of that unit. Your kitchen, your living room, audio capture too." I thought about the last week, talking to myself over coffee, a phone call with my accountant about the property I'd inherited when Margaret's mother passed, a conversation with my doctor's office about my upcoming physical. All of it, just words in my own house, in a place that was supposed to be mine. "My son installed it," I said. Paulson nodded slowly. "I understand. I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear it carefully. Do not confront him. Not yet." I looked at him. "If you confront him now, everything goes underground. Whatever this is, and we don't know what it is yet, if he knows you know, it's over. We get nothing." He paused. "Right now, you know, and he doesn't know you know. That's an advantage. I want you to use it." He walked me through what he needed. "Go home. Act normal. If Brandon calls, talk the way you always talk. Keep the cameras up. We'll monitor the transmission signal from our end. See where it's going, who's accessing it." I drove home through the January dark and sat in my living room with every light on, looking at the camera above my kitchen counter. The little lens was almost invisible. A week ago, I'd felt watched over. Now I understood the difference between that and being watched. I made a decision that night. If someone wanted to listen to my life, I'd give them something worth hearing. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table within clear range of the camera, and started talking. To myself, to Margaret's photograph on the mantel, to nobody in particular the way old men do when they've lived alone long enough. "Thinking about updating my estate plan," I said, wrapping both hands around my mug. "With the property values the way they are, the farm parcel alone is worth considerably more than I paid for it. Probably time to sit down with the attorney and restructure things." I paused, poured a little more coffee. "Might consider adding Brandon as co-trustee. He's good with numbers, could simplify things considerably." I said those words to an empty kitchen and a camera lens the size of a pencil eraser. Then I folded the newspaper, rinsed my mug, and went about my morning. My phone rang at 11. "Brandon." "Hey, Dad." Random thought, have you looked at your estate documents lately? Courtney was talking to her financial advisor, and he mentioned that a lot of people our parents' age have outdated paperwork. It might be worth a conversation. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe. 3 hours. I had spoken those words 3 hours ago. "Hadn't thought about it," I said. "Maybe you're right. I could come down next weekend. We could look things over together. I just want to make sure you're protected." "Protected?" I turned the word over. "The way you'd turn something sharp in your hand, carefully." "That'd be nice," I said. "Let's plan on it." He came down that Saturday. Just Brandon. No Courtney, no kids. He brought lunch from a barbecue place in Brentwood. We ate at the kitchen table, and he was warm in a way he hadn't been in years, attentive, interested, asking about the neighbors, the property, Margaret's mother's land trust. At one point, he said, very casually, "Do you remember when you mentioned to me that you'd been thinking about the farm parcel? You said something about restructuring." I had never mentioned it to him, not in any real conversation, only to a camera. "Did I?" I said. "Must have slipped my mind." He smiled. "It's okay, Dad, that's what I'm here for." There it was. Slid in so naturally I might have missed it, the gentle, repeated suggestion that my memory was unreliable, that I needed managing, that I was, in some measurable way, already slipping. I watched him for the rest of that lunch and understood I was looking at a performance, a careful, patient, well-rehearsed performance. He refilled my water glass. He asked about my sleep. He mentioned twice that the drive out to see me wasn't a burden. Every gesture designed to build a record, the attentive son, the concerned heir, and the aging father who needed help he didn't know he needed yet. After he left, I stood at the front window and watched his truck disappear down the road. Then I went to my desk and opened my laptop and started writing down every specific thing he had asked me about that day. The farm parcel, the estate documents, whether I had a healthcare proxy, whether Margaret's trust had been fully settled. He was building a map of everything I owned. I found the folder on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks into playing along. I'd been feeding the camera a steady diet of carefully constructed half-truths, concerns about my memory, uncertainty about my finances, gratitude for Brandon's help, and each time, within hours, Brandon had called or texted with a response that tracked almost word for word with what I'd said into that lens. I was in my office looking for the title to the tractor, a genuine errand, nothing to do with any of it, when I noticed something in the back of my filing cabinet that didn't belong. A manila folder, too new, edges still sharp. The tab was labeled, in Brandon's handwriting, "Dad Notes." I pulled it out. The first page was a timeline, dates going back 8 months, notes beside each one. April, mentioned feeling tired after yard work. Confirm with doctor record. June, forgot name of neighbor's new dog, documented. August, repeated story about county assessor position, told it twice in same conversation. A story he had steered me toward telling twice. I remembered it now. He'd asked me how I got the job, and when I started answering, he'd interrupted, then circled back and asked again as if I hadn't answered. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Behind the timeline was a printed form, Tennessee Adult Conservatorship Petition, my name in the designated fields, his name as the proposed conservator, handwritten notes in the margin, capacity evaluation arranged through Dr. Mercer, independent assessment needed for filing. Behind that, a worksheet, assets column, the house, assessed value, Margaret's mother's land trust, my pension, life insurance, a line at the bottom with a number that made the room very quiet, total estimated estate, $1.4 million. I sat down on the floor of my office, just sat down, because my legs decided we were done standing. I thought about Brandon at 9 years old, the summer I taught him to fish at Tim's Ford Lake. He'd been patient in the way children rarely are, sitting still for 2 hours, waiting. When he finally got a strike, he'd looked at me with pure terror and pure joy in the same expression. "Dad, I got one. I got one. What do I do?" I'd talked him through it, kept my hand near his on the rod without taking it, let him reel it in himself. "I trust you, Dad. You know what to do." I came back to my office floor, the folder in my hands, my son's handwriting, my life in a column of numbers. I called Frank. He drove over in 20 minutes. I spread the folder on the kitchen table. He read through it the way he used to read case files, methodically, no expression, cover to cover before he spoke. "He's building a competency case," Frank said. "Conservatorship gives him legal control over your finances, your property decisions, your health care. You'd need his signature to sell anything, access accounts, make medical choices. He can't do that without a court agreeing. He can't do it without evidence. He's been manufacturing evidence." Frank tapped the timeline page. 8 months of documented incidents. A cooperative doctor, apparently. An independent evaluation he's planning to arrange through someone he already knows. He looked up. "This is patient. This is planned." "He grew up in this house," I said. It came out quieter than I intended. Frank didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Have you called Paulson?" I called Detective Paulson that evening. He told me to bring the folder in Monday morning and not to touch the cameras. He also told me something new. The transmission signal from the camera system had been traced. It was going to a server registered to a company called Argent Advisory, LLC, incorporated 18 months ago in Delaware. The registered agent was a man named Spencer Lowe. Paulson ran Spencer Lowe while I was sitting in his office. 51 years old. Formerly licensed as a financial advisor in Georgia. License revoked for misappropriation of client funds. 2 civil settlements, neither publicized. Currently operating as an estate planning consultant unlicensed in the Nashville area. Do you know this man? Paulson asked. I didn't. But I knew the name Argent Advisory. Brandon had mentioned it once, months ago, almost in passing a consulting firm he'd been working with on some investments. I hadn't asked follow-up questions. I hadn't thought to. Your son isn't doing this alone, Paulson said. Lowe has done this before, found a family member, coached them through a conservatorship filing. He takes a percentage. Consulting fee, it gets called. The family member gets some. Lowe takes his cut, and the target loses control of their estate before they understand what's happening. I stared at the photo on Paulson's monitor. Spencer Lowe had a pleasant face, the kind of face that inspires confidence at a dinner table. My son came to him, I said. Or he came to my son. Does it matter? Paulson said, and he looked at me in a way I recognized the way Frank had looked at me the morning he examined the camera, the way my doctor looks at me when a test comes back with something that requires a conversation. Not pity exactly, more like the particular sorrow of having to tell a person what is true. I heard Brandon's voice for the first time through the camera's own feed on a Tuesday night ironic, using their equipment against them. Paulson's team had tapped the server. They patched me in on a monitored call. I sat in my truck in my own driveway, listening through the speaker, Brandon's voice, tense. He mentioned the estate documents again on his own. He's starting to engage. Spencer Lowe's voice smooth. Good. That's good. You need to get him to a meeting with your attorney before the end of the month. I have the evaluation arranged for the 12th. If we can get a signed healthcare proxy in the interim, that strengthens the petition considerably. What if he pushes back? He won't. That's what the documentation is for. 18 months of documented decline, witnessed by family, corroborated by a professional evaluation. A judge looks at that and sees a clear picture. A pause. Your father is 67, lives alone, recently widowed. Courts are sympathetic to these filings when the family demonstrates genuine concern. And the property? Once the conservatorship is granted, you have legal authority to act on his behalf. We liquidate the land trust, consolidate the accounts, structure it as estate management. It's completely legal. It happens every day. And nobody questions it because the son appears to be doing right by his father. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then, he's not going to understand why this is happening. They rarely do, Lowe said. That's rather the point. I sat in my truck in the dark for a long time after Paulson ended the feed. The house was lit up behind me. All the lights I'd turned on when I came out. The camera above the front door looked down at my driveway. The camera above the garage. All of it watching, waiting. My son had never once asked how I was sleeping. Not really. Every question had been a probe. Every visit an evidence-gathering exercise. And I had let him in. I had laughed with him over lunch. I had been grateful. I called Paulson at 7 the next morning. He told me the recording was sufficient. They had enough for fraud, elder financial exploitation, unlicensed financial consulting in the state of Tennessee. He wanted to execute a meeting, draw both of them in, get them on record. I sent Brandon a text. Brandon, I've been thinking about everything we discussed. I'd like to move forward with the estate planning. Can you come down Thursday? Bring whoever you've been working with. I want to do this right. 3 dots. Then, Dad, that's great. Really great. I'll bring Spencer. He knows exactly what to do. See you Thursday at 10. I put my phone down and looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantel. She was smiling in that picture, the one from our 25th anniversary, taken on the back porch of this house. She had known things about people. She'd known them before I did, and she'd been kind enough to tell me gently. I wondered what she would have known about Brandon that I'd chosen not to see. I set the photo down and went to make coffee, and I didn't cry, because I was 67 years old, and I had learned a long time ago that grief and action don't keep well in the same room. Thursday came gray and cold, the kind of January morning that makes Tennessee feel further north than it is. Brandon arrived first, at 5 to 10, and I let him in and made him coffee, and we sat in the living room with the cameras still mounted and running, transmitting to a server that was now also transmitting to Detective Paulson's team in a van 2 streets over. Brandon was calm, relaxed even. He thought this was the finish line. Spencer Lowe arrived at 10 sharp. He was everything his photograph suggested, tailored, pleasant, carrying a leather portfolio that cost more than most people's car payments. He shook my hand with both of his. Called me, sir. Said he'd heard so much about me from Brandon, and he was honored to help our family navigate this important transition. Paulson came through my front door at 10:17, 2 officers behind him. Badges visible? Spencer Lowe understood immediately. I watched it cross his face in a fraction of a second. The shift from practiced warmth to something cold and calculating. Brandon took longer. He looked at Paulson, then at me, then at Paulson again, as if the sequence might resolve into something other than what it was. Dad. His voice was almost a question. Sit down, Brandon. I said it quietly. He sat. Paulson was professional, thorough, unhurried. He laid out what they had. The modified camera system, the server, the recordings, the conservatorship petition pulled from my own filing cabinet, the financial records linking Lowe's firm to Brandon's accounts, the taped phone call from Tuesday night. Lowe's attorney, apparently on speed dial, was answering within 2 minutes. Smart man. Said nothing after that. Brandon had no attorney. Brandon sat across from me and watched his own plan get described back to him in the precise, clinical language of a police report, and his face went through things I had no name for. At one point, he looked at me directly and said, I wasn't going to hurt you. I thought about that for a moment. You were going to take away my right to sign my own name? I said. You were going to decide where I lived and what I could do with what I spent 30 years building, and you were going to do it while I was still in the room. I paused. What would you call that? He didn't answer. They walked Spencer Lowe out first. He went with the particular dignity of a man who has been arrested before and knows that composure is still an asset. Brandon went out after, without dignity, which was worse to watch. I stood in my own living room after they'd gone. The camera's still on the wall. The hub device on the kitchen counter. I unplugged it, wrapped the cord around it, set it by the back door. Frank was waiting on my porch. He'd been there since 9:30, around the side where Brandon wouldn't see his truck. He came in when I opened the door, looked at the empty living room, and didn't ask how I was. He just went to the kitchen and started making a fresh pot of coffee. That was the right thing. That was the only thing. The legal process took 4 months. Spencer Lowe took a plea 3 years, plus restitution, plus permanent revocation of any financial consulting activity in 3 states. His attorney negotiated it down from what Paulson had originally sought. There were other cases. There were always other cases with men like him. Brandon's outcome was harder to summarize. His attorney argued that he'd been manipulated by Lowe, that the conservatorship scheme had been Lowe's idea, that Brandon had been in debt. Courtney's medical bills from 2 years back, a business venture that had failed quietly and Lowe had found him and offered him a way out. A predator finding another predator's leverage point. I don't know how much of that was true and how much was legal strategy. I don't know anymore how much of anything was true. He received 2 years of probation, community service, a fraud conviction on his record. I changed everything. Accounts, passwords, beneficiaries. I called an estate attorney, a real one, referred by Frank, and we structured a trust that would take 2 attorneys, a judge, and clear evidence of incapacity before anyone could touch a dollar of what Margaret and I had spent 30 years building together. I had the cameras removed by a security professional who certified, in writing, that no recording equipment remained on the property. Brandon called once, 3 months after sentencing. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 1 minute and 40 seconds long. I listened to it twice and then deleted it, not because I didn't feel anything, because I felt too many things to sort them into a response. I still have the photograph of him at 9 years old, out at Tim's Ford Lake, holding up that fish with both hands and that expression terror and joy together in a face that had not yet learned to be careful. I kept it. I didn't put it away. Some things you keep, not because they stop hurting, but because putting them away would cost you more. Frank still comes on Saturday mornings. The biscuits, the sorghum, the coffee. We don't talk about it much. He mentioned once that he'd seen versions of this story before, not the details, but the shape of it. A patient scheme, a trusted face, a slow and careful dismantling. He said the ones who hurt the most weren't the strangers. They never were. I turned 68 this past October. The maples were burning again along the ridgeline. The mornings came in cool and quiet. My neighbor's dog barked at something in the dark around 6 a.m., and I lay there listening until it stopped. Nobody sent a gift this year. I didn't mind. I made coffee and went out onto the back porch with a blanket, and watched the light come up over the tree line the way it always does, slow and sure, indifferent to everything that's happened in the houses below. I own this house. I own my name. I own the right to decide what happens to everything I built. I know that now in a way I didn't before, not as an assumption, but as something I earned by fighting for it, which is a different thing entirely. If you've made it this far with me, I want to say something directly to you. I was not a careless man. I was not naive or uninformed. I spent 30 years assessing property values for a living. I knew the language of ownership and legal obligation better than most. And it still nearly happened to me, because I wanted to believe my son was showing up for me, and wanting something badly enough can make you slow to see what's actually in front of you. So here's what I learned. Not lessons. I'm not interested in giving lessons. Just what I know now that I didn't know before. A security camera in your home that you didn't fully choose is not a gift. It is an installation. Know the difference. When someone who has been distant suddenly becomes attentive, pay attention to what they are attentive to. There's a difference between asking how you're feeling and cataloging the answer. Get an estate attorney before someone else suggests you need one. On your own terms, on your own timeline, before anyone has manufactured a reason. A properly structured trust costs a few $100s and removes the entire playing field. And this, the people who want to take what's yours are rarely strangers. Strangers don't have the access or the patience. It takes someone who knows your routines, your vulnerabilities, your history. It takes someone you've already let through the door. I lock my doors now. I check my accounts every week. I know the name of every device connected to my home network because I asked a professional to help me learn it. I trust carefully and slowly, and only after I've paid attention for long enough to see the pattern. I still talk to Frank on Saturday mornings. I still watch the light come up over the ridge. I still set Margaret's photograph on the mantle and say good morning to her the way I have for 4 years, which is a private habit and nobody's business. At 68, I have what matters. My name, my property, my right to make my own decisions. My independence not given back to me, but never fully taken. That's not nothing. That's everything.